Silas Brennan's hands were still shaking when he poured his last water into a dying Apache boy's mouth. He had nothing left. No food. No hope. No reason to live past tomorrow. But something in that child's face, something that reminded him of the daughter he'd buried 2 winters ago, made him choose a stranger's life over his own. What Silas didn't know was that by sunrise, 300 Apache warriors would surround his cabin. And they weren't coming for war. If this story touches your heart, subscribe and follow until the end. Comment your city below. Let me see how far this tale travels. The canteen felt heavier than it should. Silas Brennan turned it over in his cracked hands, listening to the water slosh inside. Maybe half full. Maybe less. 3 days since his last real drink, and his body was screaming for every drop. He'd been walking since before dawn, checking trap lines that hadn't caught anything in weeks. The New Mexico sun didn't care that he was starving. Didn't care that his boots had holes in them, or that his ribs showed through his shirt like fence posts. The desert took what it wanted. Always had. Silas wiped the sweat from his eyes and kept moving. 1 foot in front of the other. That's all a man could do when everything else was gone. He almost missed the body. Just a dark shape against the sand, half hidden behind a cluster of rocks. Could have been anything. A dead coyote. A pile of old clothes. But something made him stop. Something made him look closer. His heart dropped into his stomach. A boy. Couldn't have been more than 11, maybe 12. Apache from the looks of him, the traditional clothing, the red cloth tied around his forehead, now soaked dark with sweat and something else. Blood. A lot of it pooling in the sand beneath his leg. Silas stood there for a long moment, the canteen hanging from his belt like a question he didn't want to answer. "Don't do it," he muttered to himself. "Just keep walking." But his feet wouldn't move. The boy's chest rose and fell in shallow, desperate gasps. Still alive. Barely. Silas thought about Sarah. His little girl with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn streak. She'd been 8 when the fever took her. 8 years old, and he'd watched her slip away while he held her hand and begged God for a miracle that never came. He couldn't save her. Couldn't do a damn thing but watch. "This ain't your fight," he told himself. "This ain't your problem." The boy made a sound. A weak, broken whimper that barely qualified as human. Silas was on his knees before he knew he'd moved. His hands found the boy's neck pressing against the pulse point. There. Faint, but there. Damn it! He unscrewed the canteen with shaking fingers. The water caught the sunlight, precious as liquid gold. His throat burned just looking at it. Half a canteen. Maybe enough to get him to the next town if he rationed carefully. Maybe enough to keep him alive another few days. Or maybe enough to save 1 life that wasn't his. Silas tilted the canteen to the boy's cracked lips. The first few drops just ran down his chin. Then the boy's throat worked, swallowing weakly, instinctively. "That's it," Silas whispered. "Come on, son, drink." The boy's eyes fluttered open for just a second. Dark, unfocused, terrified. He tried to pull away, tried to fight, but there was no strength left in him. "Easy. Easy now. I ain't gonna hurt you." The boy stared at him with those dark eyes, and Silas saw something he recognized. The same look Sarah had given him in those final hours. The look of someone who knew they were dying, but wasn't ready to go. Silas gave him 3 more long pulls from the canteen before forcing himself to stop. The water level had dropped dramatically. What remained wouldn't last him a day. He'd just signed his own death warrant. And for what? A stranger's child who probably wouldn't survive anyway. "Stupid," he muttered. "Stupid, stupid old man." But his hands were already tearing strips from his own shirt, wrapping them tight around the gash on the boy's leg. The wound was deep crusted with dried blood and sand. Infected, most likely. Even if the boy lived through the night, the fever might take him by morning. None of that mattered right now. All that mattered was stopping the bleeding. The sun had started its descent when Silas finally hoisted the boy onto his shoulders. The weight nearly buckled his knees. His own body was running on nothing but stubbornness and old habit. "Don't you dare die on me," he told the unconscious child. "Not after I wasted good water on you." The walk back to his cabin took 3 hours. Every step felt like dragging himself through mud. His vision narrowed to a dark tunnel, and more than once he stumbled, nearly dropping his burden. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Something kept him moving, something stronger than thirst or exhaustion, or the voice in his head telling him to give up. Maybe it was spite. Maybe it was something else. By the time the broken-down structure of his place came into view, Silas's legs were shaking so bad he could barely stand. The cabin wasn't much four walls that leaked when it rained, a roof that sagged in the middle empty spaces where windows used to be. He'd stopped calling it home months ago. Now, it was just the place where he waited to die. He laid the boy on the only piece of furniture he had left, an old wooden bench near the cold fireplace. The kid was burning up, fever raging through his small body. Silas checked the wound again, cleaned it with the last splash of water from his canteen. Then he sat back against the wall and closed his eyes. The empty canteen hung from his hand like a judgment he couldn't escape. The night passed in fragments. Silas drifted in and out, his body too exhausted to stay conscious, but too wired to truly sleep. Every time his eyes closed, he saw Sarah's face. Every time they opened, he saw the Apache boy lying on the bench fighting for his life. The boy stirred a few times, mumbling words Silas couldn't understand. Fever dreams, probably. Maybe calling for his mother. Maybe cursing the white man who'd dragged him here. Around midnight, the boy's eyes opened again. This time they were clearer, more focused. He looked at Silas for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Silas shook his head. "I don't understand, son. I don't speak your language." The boy tried again, different words, this time his small hand moving to his chest. "Goyakla," he said. Then he pointed at Silas. A name. The boy was giving his name. "Silas," he replied, tapping his own chest. "Silas Brennan." The boy Goyakla nodded weakly. Then his eyes drifted to the empty canteen lying on the floor between them. Something shifted in his expression. Understanding maybe, or gratitude, or something else entirely. He spoke again, a longer string of words that meant nothing to Silas. But the tone was clear enough. Whatever he was saying, it mattered. "Get some sleep," Silas said. "We'll figure the rest out in the morning." If there was a morning, for either of them. Goyakla's eyes drifted closed again, and this time his breathing seemed easier. The fever was still there, but maybe, just maybe, it was starting to break. Silas stayed awake as long as he could, watching over the boy like he'd once watched over Sarah. The memory hurt, but he didn't push it away this time. Maybe that was the point. Maybe this was his chance to do what he couldn't do before. Or maybe he was just a dying man having foolish thoughts in the dark. The first gray light of dawn crept through the cracks in the walls when Silas finally let himself close his eyes for real. That's when he heard it. Low and rhythmic, distant, but growing closer. The unmistakable thunder of hooves. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Silas's blood turned to ice. He staggered to the door on legs that didn't want to work and pushed it open. The horizon was moving. A wall of dust rose into the pale morning sky, and beneath it, dark shapes spread across the desert like a stain. Riders. More riders than Silas had ever seen in one place, and they were coming straight for him. His hand went to his hip out of instinct, reaching for a gun that wasn't there. He'd sold his rifle 3 months back when the hunger got bad enough. Sold his pistol a month after that. Now he stood in the doorway of his falling-apart cabin with nothing but his bare hands. The riders kept coming. The ground started to vibrate beneath his feet. Silas thought about running. The thought flashed through his mind, sharp and clear. He could grab what little he had, slip out the back, disappear into the rocks before they circled around. But he didn't move. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that he'd made his choice when he gave that kid his water. Running now wouldn't change what was coming. The first line of riders broke through the dust about 200 yards out. Apache warriors on horseback spread across the desert in a formation that could swallow his entire property whole. Silas counted them without meaning to. 50, 100, 200, 300. They wore traditional dress, some with painted faces, others with leather wrappings and feathers tied into their hair. Every single one of them carried weapons, lances, bows, shields decorated with symbols he couldn't read. This was it then. This was how Silas Brennan met his end. Strangely, he wasn't afraid. Maybe he was too tired for fear. Maybe he'd been ready to die for so long that the actual prospect didn't scare him anymore. He stepped out from the doorway and into the open. His torn shirt flapped in the morning breeze. His face was gaunt cheekbones, sharp enough to cast shadows in the early light. If they were going to kill him, he'd face it standing. The riders slowed as they approached, forming a massive semicircle that cut off every escape route. The sound of hooves gradually faded into eerie silence. 300 pairs of eyes fixed on Silas. He felt the weight of every single stare. One rider moved forward from the center. His horse was white, standing out against the sea of brown and black mounts. The man sat tall in the saddle, wearing a full headdress of white and brown feathers. His face was weathered, marked with thin scars that ran across his cheeks, like war paint that never washed off. He looked to be in his 50s, but his posture belonged to someone who'd never learned to bow. The leader stopped his horse about 10 feet from where Silas stood. Neither man spoke. Silas had heard stories about Apache warriors his whole life, most of them told by men who'd never actually met one. Standing here now, facing what had to be a war chief with 300 fighters at his back, those stories felt thin and useless. The leader's dark eyes scanned Silas from head to toe, taking in the torn clothing, the empty canteen still hanging from his belt, the cabin that looked ready to collapse in the next strong wind. Then the man's gaze shifted past Silas toward the open door. "The boy's inside," Silas said. His voice came out rough, cracked from thirst and something else. "He's alive." The leader didn't acknowledge the words. He simply swung down from his white horse and walked forward, closing the distance between them with measured steps. Up close, the man was even more imposing. Broad-shouldered, with hands that looked like they'd been breaking things since before Silas was born. He stopped inches away. So close Silas could see the silver streaks in his hair beneath the headdress. For a long moment, the man just stared. His eyes moved across Silas's face, then dropped to the torn shirt, the empty canteen, the raw exhaustion carved into every line of his body. Then the leader reached out and Silas's muscles locked, but the man only lifted the empty canteen from his belt, weighed it in his palm, turned it over, unscrewed the cap and looked inside at nothing. His jaw tightened. When he let the canteen drop, it swung on its strap like a hanged man. Without a word, the leader brushed past Silas and walked toward the cabin. Silas heard footsteps on the wooden floor inside. Then silence. 300 warriors hadn't moved an inch. Their eyes tracked every breath he took. Silas waited. His heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to stay still. Whatever was happening inside that cabin would determine whether he lived or died in the next few minutes. The seconds crawled by. When the leader emerged, his expression had changed. The hardness was still there, but something else had crept in around the edges. He stopped in the doorway and looked back inside one more time, as if confirming what he'd seen. Then his gaze swung back to Silas. The leader spoke. The words were Apache, flowing together in a way that made them sound almost musical. Silas didn't understand a syllable, but he caught the tone. Not threatening, but not friendly either. Something in between. "I don't speak your language," Silas said. "I just found him out there. He was dying. I did what I could." The leader studied him for another long moment. Then he did something Silas didn't expect. He reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out a small leather flask. Held it up so Silas could see it clearly. Then he tossed it. Silas caught it on instinct. It was heavy, full, water. Before Silas could process what that meant, the leader turned to face his warriors. He raised his right hand, high fist closed, then opened his fingers wide. The entire formation began to move. Warriors dismounted. Hands reached into saddlebags, pulling out bundles, wrapped in cloth containers, rolled blankets. They started walking forward, dozens of them, converging on the cabin from all sides. Silas stood frozen, watching 300 Apache warriors descend on his property with their arms full. They laid bundles at his feet and near the cabin entrance. Dried meat, leather pouches that sloshed with water. Woven blankets in patterns he'd never seen before. Supplies that would last months. The warriors didn't speak to him, didn't even look at him directly. They simply placed their offerings and stepped back. Within minutes, Silas was surrounded by more resources than he'd seen in half a year. His hands shook as he unscrewed the cap of the flask the leader had given him. The first sip hit his throat like salvation. He forced himself to stop after 3 swallows, even though every instinct screamed at him to drain it dry. The leader watched. When Silas lowered the flask, the man nodded once, then he pointed at Silas, then at himself, then made a gesture with his hands, palms facing each other, coming together to form a bridge. The meaning was clear, even without words. Silas Brennan had just made a debt, and 300 Apache warriors had come to make sure it was paid. Inside the cabin, Goyakla was awake. The boy's eyes were clearer now, the fever finally breaking. But when he saw the leader standing in the doorway, his whole body went rigid. He tried to sit up despite the pain. The leader moved to him quickly, placing a hand on his shoulder and speaking in low, rapid Apache. Whatever he said made the boy's tension melt immediately. Goyakla responded, his voice weak but urgent. He kept glancing at Silas while he spoke, pointing with one trembling hand. The leader listened without interrupting. His expression shifted through emotions Silas couldn't name. When the boy finished, the leader stood and turned to face Silas. He pointed at the boy, then at himself, then made a gesture like cradling something small. Family. The word didn't need translation. This wasn't just any child. This was someone important. Someone loved. Someone whose life Silas had saved with nothing more than a half-empty canteen and a choice he couldn't explain. The leader spoke again, slower this time, more deliberate. When Silas shook his head helplessly, the man's jaw tightened. He looked around the cabin, his eyes landing on the dirt floor. Then he knelt and began drawing with his finger. A circle. Smaller circles inside it. Then a single circle separated from the group. He pointed at the separated circle, then at the boy. Lost. The boy had been lost. Next, the leader drew a rough figure of a person. He pointed at it, then at Silas. Then drew a line through half the figure and gestured at Silas's torn shirt. The empty canteen. Sacrifice. Silas's throat tightened. This man had seen everything. The poverty. The desperation. The choice to give up his own survival for a stranger. The leader drew one more thing. 2 circles side by side connected by a line. He pointed at one, then at himself. Pointed at the other, then at Silas. Connected. Bound. The question wasn't whether Silas wanted this connection. That choice had already been made when he tilted that canteen to a dying boy's lips. The question was what happened next. The leader stood, walked to the doorway, looked out at his warriors assembled in the morning light. Then he spoke over his shoulder. A string of words that sounded almost like a question. Silas understood none of it, but the tone was unmistakable. An offer was being made, or maybe a test. The leader turned back, his eyes boring into Silas with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. Goyakla said something from the bench. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it made the leader's expression soften for just a moment. Then the man looked at Silas and made a new gesture. Hand extended, palm up, then closing into a fist and bringing it to his chest. Trust. Loyalty. Both. Silas met the leader's eyes, held them without flinching. He thought about the life he'd been living, the waiting, the emptiness, the slow march toward a grave that didn't seem to be coming fast enough. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made at her bedside that he'd keep living even when living felt impossible. He thought about the boy on the bench, the one who was only alive because Silas had made a choice that made no sense. Maybe that was the point. Maybe none of it was supposed to make sense. Silas nodded. Once. Slow and deliberate. The leader's face didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something that looked almost like relief. He placed his right hand over his heart and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect between equals. Then he walked to the doorway and called out to his warriors. Immediately, men began moving with renewed purpose. Some headed toward the cabin with tools. Others started marking out areas near the structure. The leader turned back to Silas and made one more gesture. Palm out, then turned upward. Wait. Whatever came next would take time. But for the first time and longer than he could remember, Silas Brennan had something worth waiting for. The boy Goyakla spoke from the bench, his voice stronger now. The leader smiled, a brief flash of warmth that transformed his severe features. He responded to the boy, then looked at Silas and pointed at him. Goyakla's gaze followed, and he said something that needed no translation. The word hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Silas Brennan had saved a life, and in doing so, he'd finally found a reason to save his own. The leader's name was Nana. Silas learned it through repetition, the same way Goyakla had learned his. The old warrior would point at himself and say the name until Silas could pronounce it properly. Then he'd nod once, satisfied, and move on to the next word. They spent 3 days like that, Nana teaching, Silas learning, Goyakla translating when he could, his English broken but improving with each passing hour. The boy had a gift for language. He soaked up words like dry earth, soaking up rain, storing them away, and pulling them out when needed. By the second day, he could form simple sentences. By the third, he was acting as a bridge between the two men who couldn't understand each other. "My grandfather says you are foolish man," Goyakla told Silas on the morning of the third day. The boy was sitting up now, his leg bandaged properly with herbs and clean cloth. "He says only fool gives water to enemy." Silas looked at Nana, who stood near the doorway, watching the exchange with unreadable eyes. "Tell your grandfather I didn't see an enemy," Silas said. "I saw a dying child." Goyakla translated. Nana's expression flickered something that might have been surprise or approval, or both. The old warrior spoke at length, his hands moving to emphasize certain points. "He says this is why you are still alive," Goyakla said. "Because you did not see enemy. You saw," the boy struggled for the word, then touched his chest. "You saw person, human, like you." "That's all any of us are," Silas said quietly. "Just people trying to survive." When Goyakla translated this, Nana went very still. He stared at Silas for a long moment, then crossed the room and sat down across from him. The old warrior spoke again, slower this time, more deliberate. His dark eyes never left Silas's face. "He asks about your family," Goyakla said. "He asks why you live alone, why no wife, no children." The question hit Silas like a fist to the chest. He'd spent 2 years trying not to think about it, trying to bury the memories so deep they couldn't hurt him anymore. "I had a family," he said. The words came out rough. "A wife, a daughter. They're gone now." "Gone where?" "Gone to God, I reckon. Fever took them both winter of '74. Goyakla translated. Nana's expression changed, the hardness softening into something that looked almost like understanding. The old warrior spoke again, his voice lower now. "He says he knows this pain," Goyakla said. "He lost his son, my father, 3 summers ago. Soldiers came to our camp. My father fought to protect us." The boy's voice wavered. "He did not survive." Silas looked at Nana with new eyes, the scars on the old man's face, the weight he carried in his shoulders, the fierce protectiveness he showed toward his grandson. They were the same, 2 men hollowed out by loss, trying to find reasons to keep going. "I'm sorry," Silas said. "Truly." Nana didn't need the translation. He seemed to understand the tone well enough. He reached out and gripped Silas's forearm, a gesture of acknowledgement between equals. Then he spoke again, and this time there was urgency in his voice. "He says trouble is coming," Goyakla translated. "The white settlers, they see our warriors. They are afraid. Afraid people do stupid things." "What kind of stupid things?" "The kind that gets people killed." As if summoned by the words themselves, one of the warriors appeared in the doorway. He spoke rapidly to Nana, gesturing toward the east. Nana's jaw tightened. He rose to his feet and headed outside, motioning for Silas to follow. The sight that greeted them made Silas's stomach drop. Riders. Not Apache this time. A group of maybe 15 men on horseback approaching from the direction of the Holloway Ranch. Even from a distance, Silas could see the rifles glinting in the morning sun. The Apache warriors had already formed a defensive line, weapons at the ready. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. "This is bad," Silas muttered. Nana spoke without looking at him, his eyes fixed on the approaching riders. "My grandfather says you must speak for us," Goyakla said. The boy had followed them outside, limping on his injured leg. "He says the white men will not listen to Apache voice, but maybe they listen to you." "I ain't exactly popular with them either, son." "You are still white. That matters to them." Silas couldn't argue with that. He stepped forward, positioning himself between the Apache line and the approaching riders. His heart was pounding, but he forced himself to stand tall. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't face it, cowering. The riders slowed as they got closer, spreading out into a formation that mirrored the Apache line. At their center rode a man Silas knew all too well, Marcus Holloway. They'd been friends once, back when Silas first arrived in the territory. Marcus had even offered him work on the ranch when times got hard. But that was before Silas retreated into his grief and pushed everyone away. Before the distance between them grew too wide to bridge. Now Marcus sat on his horse with a rifle across his lap, staring at Silas like he was looking at a stranger. "Brennan." Marcus's voice was flat. "You want to explain what the hell is going on here?" "Morning, Marcus. Nice day for a ride." "Don't play games with me. I've got 300 Apache warriors camped on my border, and now I find you standing in the middle of them like you belong there. People are scared. They're talking about calling in the army." "No need for that." Silas kept his voice calm, steady. "These folks ain't here for trouble. They came to collect a boy who got lost and hurt. I found him, patched him up. They're grateful, that's all." Marcus's eyes swept across the Apache line, counting weapons, assessing threats. "Grateful," he repeated. "That's a lot of warriors for a thank you visit." "The boy is important to them, grandson of their chief." Silas nodded toward Nana, who stood watching with his hand resting on his lance. "They wanted to make sure he got home safe. Can't fault a man for protecting his family. I can fault him for bringing an army onto settled land. They haven't crossed onto your property, haven't threatened anyone, haven't so much as looked at your cattle wrong. They're just here, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Silas hesitated. He wasn't entirely sure himself, but he knew what Nana wanted, what the old warrior had been trying to communicate over the past 3 days. "Waiting to see if we're going to give them a reason to fight," he said finally, "or if we're smart enough to let them leave in peace." Marcus's jaw worked. The men behind him shifted uneasily, hands tightening on their weapons. "And what about you, Brennan? Which side are you on?" "I ain't on any side. I'm just a man trying to keep people from killing each other." "That's not how it works. Not out here. You're either with us or against us." "Then I reckon I'm neither." The words hung in the air. Marcus stared at him, something flickering in his eyes. Anger maybe, or disappointment, or both. "You know what they did to my brother," Marcus said. His voice had gone quiet, dangerous. "You know what they're capable of." "I know what some of them did, just like I know what some of us have done to them. Doesn't mean everyone's guilty for the sins of a few." "That's easy to say when it ain't your family in the ground." Silas felt the words like a knife between his ribs, his hands clenched at his sides. "My family's in the ground too, Marcus. Don't you dare tell me I don't understand loss." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The tension stretched so tight, it felt like it might snap and cut them all. Then Goyakla stepped forward. The boy moved past Silas, limping on his injured leg, and stopped in the open space between the two groups. He looked impossibly small standing there, a child facing down 15 armed men. "Please," he said. His English was careful, deliberate. "We do not want fight. We want go home. That is all." Marcus looked down at the boy. Something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe at hearing English from Apache lips. "Who taught you to talk like that?" "Him." Goyakla pointed at Silas. "He saved my life. Gave me his water when he had none for himself. Now we owe him debt. We do not hurt people who help us." Marcus's eyes cut to Silas. "That true, you gave up your water for this kid?" "It's true." "Why you didn't know him? Didn't know him anything?" Silas looked at Goyakla, at the boy who reminded him so much of Sarah, of the chance he'd never gotten to say goodbye properly. "Because I couldn't watch another child die," he said quietly. "I've seen enough of that to last me a lifetime." The words seemed to land somewhere deep. Marcus's grip on his rifle loosened slightly. Behind Silas, Nana stepped forward. He didn't raise his weapon, didn't make any threatening moves. He simply walked to stand beside his grandson, one weathered hand resting on the boy's shoulder. Then he spoke. The words were Apache, incomprehensible to the settlers, but the tone was clear. Calm, measured, respectful. When he finished, he looked at Silas and nodded. "What did he say?" Marcus demanded. Silas glanced at Goyakla. "My grandfather says he has no quarrel with the white settlers," the boy translated. "He says we will leave your lands in peace as long as peace is offered in return. He says." Goyakla hesitated, then continued. "He says too many have died already, on both sides. He is tired of burying his people. He thinks you are tired too." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. His men shifted behind him, uncertain. "And what happens next time?" Marcus asked. "What happens when one of your warriors decides peace isn't good enough? What happens when somebody's cattle goes missing or a fence gets torn down?" "Then we talk," Silas said, stepping forward. "Before anybody reaches for a gun, we talk. That's what I'm offering. A way to solve problems without bloodshed." You're offering to be some kind of, what, mediator? "I'm offering to stand in the middle. Listen to both sides. Try to find solutions that don't involve killing." Marcus let out a harsh laugh. "You really think that'll work? You think you can just talk your way through everything?" "I think it's worth trying. Better than the alternative." "And what do you get out of it?" Silas considered the question. What did he get? A purpose, maybe. A reason to wake up in the morning. A chance to do something that mattered. "I get to look at myself in the mirror," he said finally. "That's enough." Marcus studied him for a long moment. Then he looked at Nana, at Goyakla, at the line of warriors standing silently behind them. "If this goes wrong," he said slowly, "it's on your head, Brennan. You understand that if one person gets hurt because you wanted to play peacemaker—" "I understand." Marcus nodded once. Then he pulled his horse's reins, turning the animal away. "We're leaving," he announced to his men. "For now." The settlers followed, casting wary glances over their shoulders as they rode away. Silas watched until they disappeared over the ridge, his heart still pounding in his chest. When he turned back, Nana was looking at him with an expression that might have been approval. The old warrior spoke, and Goyakla translated. "He says you have courage. Foolish courage, maybe, but courage still. He says he will tell his people about this day, about the white man who stood between two fires and did not burn." Silas almost laughed. "Not sure didn't burn is much of an accomplishment." "It is," Goyakla said seriously. "Most men burn. You did not." Nana placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head slightly. The same gesture of respect he'd made before, but it meant something different now. Something more. Then he turned and began giving orders to his warriors. The tension in the camp began to ease, weapons being lowered, postures relaxing. Silas let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He'd bought them time. That was something. But he knew Marcus well enough to know this wasn't over. The settlers would be back with more questions and more demands. And eventually someone would do something stupid that couldn't be talked away. When that happened, Silas would have to choose. Really choose, not just stand in the middle and hope for the best. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt almost right. For the first time in 2 years, Silas Brennan had something to lose. And that meant he finally had something to fight for. Over the next week, the Apache camp transformed from a temporary gathering into something more permanent. Warriors rotated through in groups, some leaving to rejoin their families, others arriving to take their place. Supply runs went out and came back. Hunting parties brought in game. Silas watched it all with growing fascination. These weren't the savage raiders the stories had warned him about. They were people, families, communities with their own laws and customs and ways of living. Goyakla became his guide to this new world. The boy's leg was healing well, but Nana insisted he stay close to Silas, learning English and teaching Apache in return. It was a practical arrangement, but Silas suspected there was more to it than that. Nana was testing him, watching to see how Silas treated his grandson, how he reacted to Apache customs, whether he could be trusted. So far, Silas seemed to be passing. "Why did you save me?" Goyakla asked one evening. They were sitting outside Silas's cabin watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "You did not know me. I could have been enemy." Silas was quiet for a moment. He'd been asking himself the same question. "I had a daughter," he said finally. "Her name was Sarah. She was about your age when she died." Goyakla's expression softened. "The fever." "Yeah, the fever." Silas stared at his hands. "I couldn't save her. I tried everything, but nothing worked. I just had to watch her slip away." "This made you sad." "This made me want to die." The words came out before Silas could stop them. He hadn't admitted that to anyone, not even himself. But somehow, sitting here with this Apache boy who'd nearly died in his arms, the truth felt easier to speak. "When I found you in that desert," he continued, "I saw her. Not really, but I remembered how it felt. Watching someone you care about suffer and not being able to do anything." He shook his head. "I couldn't go through that again. Couldn't stand there and do nothing while another child died." Goyakla was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and placed his small hand on Silas's arm. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not doing nothing." Silas's throat tightened. He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned orange, then pink, then deep purple. The sounds of the Apache camp drifted toward them. Voices, laughter, the crackle of cooking fires. "My grandfather likes you," Goyakla said eventually. "How can you tell? He has not tried to kill you yet." Silas chuckled. "That's a pretty low bar, son. You do not know my grandfather. For him, this is high praise." They were still laughing when Nana appeared out of the gathering darkness. The old warrior looked at them with raised eyebrows, clearly wondering what was so amusing. Goyakla spoke to him in Apache, explaining. Nana's expression didn't change, but there was a glint in his eyes that might have been humor. He said something to Goyakla, then turned and walked away. "What did he say?" "He says you laugh like a dying horse." Silas stared at the boy. Was that a joke?" Goyakla grinned. "My grandfather is very funny man. Most people do not live long enough to learn this." Against all odds, Silas found himself smiling. A real smile, the kind he hadn't felt on his face in years. Maybe there was hope for all of them yet. The trouble came 3 days later. Silas was helping repair a section of fence near his property line when he heard the shouting. Angry voices carrying across the desert from the direction of the Apache camp. He dropped his tools and ran. By the time he reached the camp, a crowd had already gathered. Apache warriors stood in a tight circle, weapons drawn, surrounding 2 figures on the ground. Silas pushed through the crowd, his heart hammering in his chest. In the center of the circle lay a young Apache warrior clutching his arm. Blood seeped between his fingers. Standing over him, looking terrified and defiant, was a settler boy who couldn't have been more than 16. The boy held a pistol in shaking hands. His eyes darted around the circle of warriors, searching for escape routes that didn't exist. "What happened?" Silas demanded. One of the warriors, a man named Broken Feather, who'd been friendlier than most, answered in broken English. "This boy. He come to our camp. Say we steal his father's horses. Loya tell him no. We take nothing. The boy—" He made a shooting gesture. "Very stupid." Silas looked at the wounded warrior. The bullet had gone through his forearm, painful, but not fatal. Small mercies. "Where did you come from, son?" Silas asked the settler boy. "Henderson Spread, 3 miles east." The boy's voice cracked with fear. "They took our horses. My pa sent me to get them back." "These people didn't take your horses. They must have. Nobody else around here would—" "Did you see them take the horses with your own eyes?" The boy faltered. "No, but—" "Did you see any evidence they had your horses, tracks leading this way, your brand on any of their animals?" "No, but everyone knows. Everyone knows nothing." Silas stepped closer, forcing the boy to meet his eyes. "What everyone knows is stories, rumors, things they heard from someone who heard from someone else. That ain't evidence. That's just fear looking for a target." The boy's pistol wavered. "Then who took them?" "Could have been bandits. Could have been rustlers passing through. Could have been a whole lot of people who aren't standing in this camp right now." Silas held out his hand. "Give me the gun, son, before you make things worse than they already are." For a long, terrible moment, Silas thought the boy might refuse, might do something stupid that would end with a lot more blood on the ground. Then the pistol dropped. The boy handed it over with shaking fingers. Silas let out a breath. One crisis averted. But the wounded warrior was still bleeding, and the Apache around them looked ready to demand justice. He turned to face the crowd. Nana stood at the edge, his expression unreadable, watching, waiting to see what Silas would do. "This boy made a mistake," Silas said loudly. "A bad one. He hurt one of your people based on a lie he was told. That's wrong, and he needs to answer for it." The warriors muttered among themselves. Some looked skeptical, others openly angry. "But he's also just a kid," Silas continued. "A scared kid who believed what his father told him. He didn't come here looking to start a war. He came looking for horses that aren't here." "Blood was spilled," Broken Feather said. "Blood must be answered." "You're right, it does." Silas turned to the settler boy. "What's your name, son?" "Tommy. Tommy Henderson." "Tommy, you shot a man today. That man has a family. People who care about him. You understand that—" Tommy's face had gone pale. I didn't mean. I didn't. Meaning doesn't matter. What matters is what you did. Now, the way I see it, you've got two choices. You can run back to your father and let this become a blood feud that gets people killed on both sides. Or you can stay here and make it right. Make it right how? Silas looked at Nana. The old warrior's expression hadn't changed, but there was something like curiosity in his eyes. "You work," Silas said. "You stay here until Loya's arm heals, and you do whatever needs doing. Fetch water, gather wood, help with the hunting, whatever they ask." He paused. "You show them that you're not just some ignorant settler who shoots first and thinks never. You show them you're capable of learning." Tommy stared at him. "My pa will never allow it." "Then your pa can come discuss it with me, and with them." Silas gestured at the warriors surrounding them. "But I'm guessing he'll see reason when he realizes the alternative is a whole lot of grieving widows on both sides." The boy swallowed hard. He looked at Loya still clutching his bleeding arm, and something shifted in his expression. "I'm sorry," Tommy said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry I shot you." Loya's face was tight with pain, but he met the boy's eyes. After a long moment, he nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. Silas turned to Nana. "Does this satisfy your people work for blood?" The old warrior was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, and Goyakla translated. "He says this is unusual solution, not Apache way." "I know, but maybe it's a new way, a way that doesn't end with more bodies in the ground." Nana considered this. Then he said something else. "He says he will allow it. For now, but if the boy causes more trouble—" "He won't." Silas looked at Tommy. "Will you—" Tommy shook his head frantically. "Good. Then let's get Loya's arm looked at properly, and you can start by fetching water for the healer." The crowd began to disperse. The immediate crisis had passed, but Silas knew this was far from over. Tommy's father would come looking for him. Marcus Holloway would hear about the shooting. The fragile peace he'd been building was about to face its first real test. But for now, a boy who'd come with violence in his heart was learning to carry water. A wounded warrior was being tended to instead of avenged. And two peoples who'd been told to hate each other were starting to see that maybe, just maybe, there was another way. Silas watched Tommy hurry off toward the stream, a water bucket in each hand. It wasn't much, but it was something, and sometimes something was all you had to work with. Jacob Henderson arrived the next morning with 8 armed men at his back. Silas heard them coming before he saw them. The thunder of hooves, the jingle of harnesses, the unmistakable sound of trouble riding in fast. He stepped out of his cabin and positioned himself in the open hands, visible posture calm. The Apache warriors had already formed their defensive line. 300 fighters ready for war weapons, drawn faces hard. Nana stood at the center, his white horse beside him, his lance in his hand. Henderson pulled his horse up short, about 50 yards out. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with a face that looked like it had been carved from sandstone. His eyes swept across the Apache line, counting, calculating. "Where's my boy?" he shouted. Silas stepped forward. "He's safe, Jacob. No need for all this. I'll decide what's needed." Henderson's voice was rough with barely controlled fury. "Those savages have my son. You expect me to just ride away? They don't have him. He came here on his own. Shot one of their warriors based on a lie you told him." Henderson's face darkened. "That's a damn lie." "Is it? Did you actually see Apaches take your horses? Or did you just assume—" "Who else would it be? They're the only ones around here who— The only ones around here who aren't white?" Silas shook his head. That ain't evidence, Jacob. That's prejudice wearing a thin disguise. Henderson's hand moved toward his rifle. The men behind him tensed. Careful, Silas said quietly. You've got 8 men. They've got 300. You really want to start something you can't finish. I want my son back. Then let me go get him. But you need to understand something first. Silas took a step closer, lowering his voice. Tommy shot a man, an innocent man who never touched your horses. The only reason that man's family isn't demanding blood right now is because I convinced them to accept work instead. Tommy stays here until the wounded man heals. He does labor. He learns that these people aren't the monsters you've been telling him about. Henderson's jaw clenched so tight, Silas could see the muscles bulging. You expect me to leave my boy with savages? I expect you to trust that I won't let anything happen to him, and I expect you to start using your brain instead of your fear. Silas met Henderson's eyes without flinching. Your horses were probably taken by bandits working the territory. I'll help you track them down if you want, but starting a war over your own mistake won't get them back. For a long moment, Henderson didn't move. His men shifted uneasily behind him, hands on weapons waiting for a signal that would start the killing. Then, Tommy emerged from the Apache camp. The boy walked forward slowly, a water bucket still in each hand, his clothes dusty and his face streaked with sweat. He looked exhausted, but unharmed. Pa, he said. Pa, don't. Henderson stared at his son. Tommy, what did they do to you? Nothing, Pa. They've been decent to me, better than I deserved after what I did. Tommy set down the buckets and faced his father. I was wrong. They didn't take our horses. I shot a man for nothing. They put ideas in your head, turned you against your own kind. No, Pa. They showed me the truth. Tommy's voice cracked. I almost started a war because of something you told me that wasn't true. People could have died. A lot of people. Henderson's face went through a series of expressions: anger, confusion, something that might have been shame. Finally, he looked at Silas. How long? Until Loya's arm heals. Couple more weeks, maybe. And then? Then Tommy goes home. And maybe he's learned something. Maybe you have too. Henderson was quiet for a long time. The tension stretched like a rope pulled too tight. Then he let out a breath and pulled his horse's reins. 2 weeks, he said. Not a day more. And if anything happens to him, nothing will happen to him. You have my word. Henderson held his gaze for another moment. Then he turned his horse and rode away, his men following. Silas watched them go, his heart slowly returning to its normal rhythm. Behind him, he heard the Apache warriors lowering their weapons. Goyakla appeared at his side. That man is very angry. Yeah, he is. Will he come back with more men? Silas considered the question. Henderson was proud and stubborn, but he wasn't stupid. He'd seen the numbers. He'd heard his own son defend the people he'd come to rescue him from. I don't think so, Silas said. But we should be ready just in case. Nana approached, his expression unreadable as always. He spoke, and Goyakla translated. My grandfather says you have a gift. The gift of speaking to hearts, not just ears. I just tell the truth. Most people aren't used to hearing it. He says truth is the most dangerous weapon. More dangerous than any lance or rifle. Silas looked at the old warrior. Is that a compliment? Goyakla smiled. From my grandfather, yes, a very big one. The days that followed were quieter, but the tension never fully dissipated. Silas could feel it in the air, like the pressure before a storm. Something was coming. He just didn't know what. Tommy Henderson worked hard, harder than Silas expected. The boy hauled water, gathered firewood, helped with hunting, and never complained. At first, the Apache treated him with cold suspicion. But as the days passed, something began to change. Loya, the warrior Tommy had shot, was the first to thaw. One evening, Silas found the two of them sitting together by a fire, Loya teaching Tommy how to fletch arrows with his good arm. "He is not so bad," Loya said in his broken English, "for white boy." Tommy ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. "He's teaching me things my pa never bothered to show me." "Like what?" "Like how to read tracks, how to move quiet in the brush, how to—" Tommy hesitated. "How to see people instead of just looking at them." Silas felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this crazy experiment was actually working. Maybe people could change if given the chance. But hope was a fragile thing, and the frontier had a way of crushing fragile things. Marcus Holloway came 3 days before Tommy's time was up. He came alone this time, which worried Silas more than an army would have. Marcus wasn't the type to ride into enemy territory without backup, unless he had a damn good reason. "We need to talk," Marcus said. He didn't dismount, just sat on his horse looking down at Silas with an expression that was impossible to read. "So, talk." "Not here, somewhere private." Silas glanced toward the Apache camp. Nana was watching from a distance, his hand resting on his lance. "Give me a minute." He walked to Nana and explained with Goyakla translating. The old warrior's eyes narrowed, but he nodded once. "He says to be careful," Goyakla said. "He says men who come alone often have the most to hide." Silas followed Marcus about half a mile from the camp to a rocky outcropping that offered privacy and shade. The rancher dismounted and faced him. "Something's happened," Marcus said. His voice was flat, controlled, but Silas could hear the tension underneath. "Something bad." "What?" "Frank Miller's dead. Found him this morning at the edge of his property, arrow through his chest." Silas felt his stomach drop. Apache arrow. That's what it looked like. "That doesn't mean—" "I know what it means and what it doesn't mean." Marcus cut him off. "But it doesn't matter what I think. What matters is what everyone else thinks. And right now they think the Apache killed one of our own." "Who's everyone else?" "Henderson, Collins, the Barrett brothers, half a dozen others who've been waiting for an excuse to ride on that camp." Marcus's jaw tightened. "They're gathering men, Brennan. Talking about justice. About teaching the savages a lesson." "That's not justice. That's a massacre waiting to happen." "You think I don't know that?" For the first time, real emotion broke through Marcus's controlled exterior. "I've been trying to talk them down, telling them to wait to let the law handle it, but they're scared and angry and looking for someone to blame. And you came to warn me." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I came to ask you something. Something I need you to answer honestly." "Go ahead." "Did they do it? Did the Apache kill Frank Miller?" Silas thought about Nana, about Goyakla, about the warriors he'd gotten to know over the past weeks, their families, their stories, their hopes for a future that didn't involve endless bloodshed. "No," he said, "they didn't." "How can you be sure?" "Because I know them. Because Nana gave his word that his people wouldn't cause trouble, and he's not the kind of man who breaks his word." Silas met Marcus's eyes. "Someone else killed Miller, someone who wanted it to look like Apache work." "Who?" "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." Marcus studied him for a long moment. Whatever he saw in Silas's face seemed to satisfy him. "You've got until tomorrow night," he said. "That's when Henderson's group is planning to ride. If you can't prove the Apache are innocent by then—" "I understand." Marcus mounted his horse. He paused, looking down at Silas with an expression that was almost apologetic. "For what it's worth, I hope you're right. I don't want this to end in blood any more than you do." "Then help me. Come with me to investigate." "I can't. If Henderson finds out I'm working with you, he'll think I've turned traitor. I won't be able to hold him back at all." Marcus shook his head. "You're on your own, Brennan. Find the truth before tomorrow night, or a lot of people are going to die." He rode away, leaving Silas standing alone with the weight of impossible odds pressing down on his shoulders. Silas returned to camp and went straight to Nana's tent. The old warrior was waiting for him, as if he'd known what was coming. Through Goyakla, Silas explained everything. The murder, the accusation, the armed men gathering for revenge. Nana listened without interrupting. When Silas finished, the old warrior was silent for a long time. "He wants to know if you believe us," Goyakla said finally. "If you believe we did not do this thing." "I believe you, but believing isn't enough. I need proof." "What kind of proof?" "The real killer, or evidence that points to someone else." Silas ran a hand through his hair. "Nana, I need your help. I need trackers. Someone who can read signs that I would miss." Nana considered this. Then he spoke at length, his tone grave. "He says he will send Broken Feather with you. He is the best tracker in our tribe. But he warns you if you fail, he will not let his people be slaughtered. He will fight." "I understand. Do you—" Goyakla's young face was serious beyond his years. "If you fail, there will be war. Many will die, on both sides." "Then I won't fail." The words came out more confident than Silas felt. But confidence was all he had left to offer. He and Broken Feather set out within the hour, riding hard toward the Miller property. The sun was already past its peak, which meant they had less than a day to find answers. Frank Miller's body had been moved by the time they arrived, but the scene of the killing remained undisturbed. Silas had been worried about that settlers weren't known for preserving evidence when they were out for blood. Broken Feather dismounted and began examining the ground. His eyes moved slowly, methodically, reading signs that were invisible to Silas. "What do you see?" Silas asked. Broken Feather held up a hand for silence. He crouched low, tracing patterns in the dirt with his fingers. Then he stood and walked in a wide circle, stopping occasionally to examine something more closely. "This was not Apache killing," he said finally. "How can you tell?" "The arrow." Broken Feather pointed to a broken shaft lying in the dirt stained dark with blood. "Apache arrow, yes, but shot wrong." "Wrong how?" Broken Feather mimed drawing a bow. "Apaches shoot like this, straight, clean. This arrow—" He shook his head. "Shot from too close. Wrong angle. Not warrior's shot." "Someone who wasn't trained as an Apache archer." "Yes, someone who wanted to look like Apache, but did not know how." Silas felt a spark of hope. "Can you track where the shooter came from?" Broken Feather smiled grimly. "Already done." He led Silas to a cluster of rocks about 30 yards from where Miller had fallen. Boot prints were visible in the soft dirt settler boots, not Apache moccasins. "He waited here," Broken Feather said. "Watched. When Miller came close, he shot. Then ran." "Which direction?" Broken Feather pointed east, toward the canyon, where water makes ground soft. They followed the trail for nearly an hour, moving as fast as they could, while Broken Feather read the signs. The tracks were sloppy, careless. Whoever had done this hadn't expected to be pursued. As the canyon came into view, Broken Feather suddenly stopped. "Horses," he said quietly. "Many horses. Recent." Silas's hand moved to his pistol. "How many?" "6. Maybe 7. Broken Feather's eyes narrowed. "One of them carries heavy load. Like supplies. Or—" He trailed off, his expression darkening. "Or what?" "Or stolen goods." The pieces started falling into place. Henderson's missing horses. Miller's death made to look like Apache work. Someone was playing both sides, stirring up conflict for their own benefit. "Bandits," Silas said, using the tension between settlers and Apache to cover their tracks. Broken Feather nodded. "Very clever. Very evil." "Can you follow them?" "I can follow anything." The canyon narrowed as they went deeper, the walls rising on either side like silent witnesses. Silas could feel danger in the air, that prickly sensation at the back of his neck that had kept him alive through the war. They found the camp just before sunset. 6 men sitting around a fire in a hidden alcove. Their horses were tied nearby, and among them, Silas recognized the Henderson brand on 3 of the animals. "That's them," he whispered. "Those are the men we're looking for." Broken Feather nodded. "What now?" Silas considered their options. 2 against 6 wasn't great odds. But if they rode back for help, the bandits might be gone by the time they returned. And they were running out of time. "We need evidence," he said. "Something I can show the settlers. Something undeniable." "The horses are not enough. The horses prove they're thieves, but we need something that ties them to Miller's killing." Broken Feather was quiet for a moment. Then he pointed to one of the men, a thin, wiry figure with a nervous energy that set him apart from the others. "That one. He carries a quiver. Apache arrows." Silas looked closer. Sure enough, the man had a quiver slung over his back, decorated with Apache symbols. "If we can get that quiver and match the arrows to the one that killed Miller, then you have proof." Silas took a deep breath. "I'm going to need your help. Tell me what to do." The plan was simple, which was about all Silas could manage under the circumstances. Broken Feather would circle around and spook the horses, creating chaos. While the bandits scrambled to control their mounts, Silas would grab the quiver and run. It wasn't a good plan, but it was the only one they had. Broken Feather melted into the shadows, moving with the silent grace that Silas had come to associate with Apache warriors. Within minutes, he had disappeared completely. Silas crept closer to the camp, keeping low, using every bit of cover he could find. His heart was pounding so loud he was sure the bandits could hear it. The wait felt like hours. Then suddenly the horses screamed. They reared and bucked, pulling at their ropes, their eyes wild with panic. The bandits leaped to their feet, cursing and shouting. Silas moved. He was across the camp before anyone noticed him. His hand closed around the quiver, yanking it free from its owner's back. "Hey, what the—" Silas ran. Behind him, he heard shouting, the sound of a gun being cocked. A bullet whizzed past his ear, close enough to feel the heat. He dove behind a boulder just as 2 more shots rang out. His breath came in ragged gasps, his legs burning from the sprint. "Over here." Broken Feather appeared out of nowhere, already mounted on his horse, holding the reins of Silas's mount. Silas didn't hesitate. He swung into the saddle, and they rode hard and fast back the way they'd come. The bandits followed, but their horses were still panicked, hard to control. By the time they got organized, Silas and Broken Feather had a commanding lead. They didn't stop until they were miles away, the canyon far behind them. Silas clutched the quiver to his chest, his heart still racing. "We did it," he breathed. "We actually did it." Broken Feather grinned. "You are either very brave or very crazy." "Probably both." They rode through the night, pushing their horses as hard as they dared. By dawn, they were back at the Apache camp, exhausted but triumphant. Nana met them at the edge of the encampment. His eyes went to the quiver in Silas's hands. "He wants to know if you found what you were looking for," Goyakla translated. "I found more than that." Silas dismounted on shaking legs. "I found the men who killed Miller, bandits working the territory. They stole Henderson's horses and framed your people for murder." He held up the quiver. "This belongs to one of them. The arrows inside will match the one that killed Miller. It's proof. Real proof." Nana took the quiver, examining it carefully. Then he looked at Silas with an expression that was almost warm. "He says you have honored your word. You promised to find the truth, and you did. The truth doesn't matter if no one believes it." Silas looked toward the east where the sun was just beginning to rise. "I need to get to Henderson before he rides. I need to show him this before anyone else dies." "Then go. We will be ready." "Ready for what?" Nana's eyes hardened. "Ready for whatever comes." If the white men choose war despite your proof. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Silas nodded. Pray it doesn't come to that. He mounted a fresh horse and rode toward the Henderson spread, carrying proof of innocence in one hand and the weight of two people's futures on his shoulders. The sun climbed higher, marking the passage of time he didn't have. Somewhere ahead, armed men were gathering, their hearts full of rage and their minds full of lies. And Silas Brennan rode to meet them alone. Silas pushed his horse harder than he should have. The animal was lathered and breathing heavy by the time the Henderson spread came into view, but he couldn't slow down. Every minute counted now. He saw them before they saw him. A crowd of men gathered in front of Henderson's barn, maybe 20 or more. Horses saddled and ready, rifles glinting in the morning sun. The air around them thick with the kind of energy that came before violence. Silas rode straight into the middle of them. "Stop," he shouted. "Nobody rides until you hear what I have to say." Henderson stepped forward, his face dark with fury. "You've got some nerve showing up here, Brennan. After everything you've done." "After everything I've done, I've been trying to prevent a massacre. You've been protecting the people who killed Frank Miller." "The Apache didn't kill Miller." Silas held up the quiver. "I can prove it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some of the men exchanged uncertain glances. Others just looked angrier. "That's Apache work," someone called out. "You're holding Apache arrows right there." These arrows came from the man who actually killed Miller, a bandit working out of the canyon about 15 miles east. Silas dismounted, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Same men who stole your horses, Henderson. I tracked them last night, found their camp, found your animals with your brand still on them." Henderson's expression flickered. "You're lying." "Am I? Then explain how I got this." Silas pulled an arrow from the quiver and held it up. "Match this to the one that killed Miller. Go ahead. Compare them side by side. They came from the same hand." "That doesn't prove anything. Could have gotten that anywhere." "I got it from a white man. A bandit who's been using Apache arrows to cover his tracks, making it look like your neighbors did it so you'd wipe each other out while he rode off with your livestock." The crowd went quiet. Silas could see the doubt creeping into their faces, the anger giving way to confusion. "Think about it," he pressed. "Who benefits from a war between settlers and Apache? Not the Apache, they're outnumbered and outgunned. Not you, you'd lose men, maybe your families. The only people who win are the ones picking over what's left when the smoke clears." "He's got a point." The voice came from the back of the crowd. Marcus Holloway pushed forward, his expression grim but thoughtful. "I've been saying all along, we should wait for proof. Now Brennan's brought us some." "Marcus, you can't seriously—" "I can, and I do." Marcus faced Henderson squarely. "Jacob, I want justice for Frank as much as anyone. But not at the cost of innocent blood. If there's even a chance Brennan's telling the truth, we owe it to ourselves to find out." Henderson's jaw worked, his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "Pa!" Tommy pushed through the crowd and stood beside Silas. The boy looked different now, older somehow, more certain of himself. "Pa, I spent 2 weeks with those people. They're not killers. They're families, mothers and fathers and kids just like us." Tommy's voice cracked with emotion. "Loya, the man I shot, he forgave me. He taught me things. He treated me better than I deserved." "Tommy, you don't understand." "I understand plenty. I understand that I believed lies about people I'd never met, and I almost started a war because of it." Tommy stepped closer to his father. "Don't make the same mistake I did. Please." Henderson stared at his son. The fury in his eyes was crumbling, replaced by something more complex. Doubt. Fear, maybe even shame. "Where's this bandit camp?" he asked finally. Silas felt a surge of relief. "About 15 miles east in the canyon where the water runs soft. 6 men well armed, but not expecting trouble." "You sure they're still there?" "No, but their tracks will be. And your horses will be too, unless they've already moved them. Henderson looked at the men around him. The mob mentality was fading, replaced by the practical thinking of ranchers and farmers. Collins, Barrett, you two are the best trackers we've got. Ride with Brennan. Find this camp, confirm what he's saying. Henderson's voice had lost its edge. The rest of us will wait here, if he's telling the truth. If I'm telling the truth, you'll owe the Apache an apology, and maybe a conversation about how to keep this from happening again. Henderson's face hardened briefly, then relaxed. One thing at a time, Brennan. Let's confirm your story first. Silas nodded. It wasn't complete victory, but it was enough. The ride to the canyon took most of the morning. Collins and Barrett were experienced men hardened by years on the frontier, but even they seemed impressed by Broken Feather's tracking when Silas explained how they'd found the camp. Apache tracker, huh? Collins said. Never thought I'd see the day a white man relied on one of them for help. We rely on what works, Silas replied. Doesn't matter what color a man's skin is if he's good at what he does. Collins grunted, but didn't argue. The bandit camp was empty when they arrived, just as Silas had feared. But the evidence remained: cold fire pits, scattered supplies, and tracks leading deeper into the canyon. They were here, Barrett confirmed, examining the ground. 6 horses, maybe 7. Left in a hurry, looks like. And there. Collins pointed to a cluster of hoof prints near the stream. Henderson brand. Clear as day. The two men exchanged glances. Whatever doubts they'd had were fading fast. We need to follow them, Silas said. They can't have gone far with that many horses. Agreed. Collins checked his rifle. Let's move. The trail led them through narrow passages and over rocky ground, but the bandits had been careless in their haste. By mid-afternoon, they spotted smoke rising from a hidden hollow about a mile ahead. That's them, Barrett said quietly. Question is, how do we play this? Silas considered their options. 3 against 6 wasn't ideal, but the bandits didn't know they were being followed. Surprise could even the odds. We split up, he said. Collins, you circle around to the north. Barrett, take the south. I'll approach from the east and draw their attention. When they're focused on me, you two move in. That's a hell of a risk you're taking, Collins said. Wouldn't be the first time. They moved into position slowly, using every bit of cover the terrain offered. Silas's heart pounded as he crept closer to the hollow, his pistol heavy in his hand. The bandits were relaxed, confident in their hiding spot. 2 of them were playing cards by the fire. 3 others were tending to the horses. The 6th, the thin, wiry one who'd carried the Apache arrows, sat apart from the rest, cleaning a rifle. Silas stepped into the open. Afternoon, gentlemen. 6 heads snapped toward him. 6 pairs of eyes went wide with shock. Who the hell are you? One of them demanded, reaching for his weapon. Name's Silas Brennan. I believe you have something that belongs to my friends. Brennan. The thin one stood slowly, his rifle still in his hands. You're that fool who's been playing peacemaker with the savages. The same savages you've been trying to frame for murder. Silas kept his voice calm, his pistol aimed at the thin man's chest. Miller was innocent. So were the Apache. But you didn't care about that, did you? You just needed someone to take the blame while you rode off with stolen property. The thin man's lip curled into a sneer. So what if we did? Those savages have been raiding these lands for years, killing settlers, burning farms. We just gave people a reason to finally do something about it. You gave people a reason to kill innocent men, women, and children. That's not justice. That's murder. It's survival. The thin man raised his rifle. And speaking of survival, the crack of a gunshot split the air, but it didn't come from the thin man's rifle. Collins emerged from the northern rock smoke rising from his weapon. The thin man crumpled his rifle, clattering to the ground. Barrett appeared from the south, his gun trained on the remaining bandits. Nobody move. You're all under arrest for murder and horse theft. The fight went out of them almost immediately. Without their leader, the bandits were just scared men facing long odds. One by one, They dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Silas let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Tie them up," he said. "We're taking them back to Henderson. Let him see exactly who's responsible for Miller's death." The ride back to the Henderson spread took longer with prisoners in tow. The bandits were sullen and silent, knowing what awaited them. Collins and Barrett kept their weapons ready, but there was no resistance. Word had spread by the time they arrived. The crowd had grown not just the men who'd been ready to ride that morning, but their wives and children, neighbors from surrounding properties, even a few Apache scouts who'd been watching from a distance. Henderson stepped forward as Silas dismounted. His eyes moved from the prisoners to the horses wearing his brand. "You were right," he said quietly. "God help me, you were right. These are the men who killed Miller. The thin one was their leader, he's dead. The rest will talk, I reckon. They'll tell you everything, if it means avoiding the rope." Henderson nodded slowly. Then he did something Silas didn't expect. He extended his hand. "I owe you an apology, Brennan. I was ready to lead men into a massacre based on lies and fear. You stopped me." Silas took the hand. "I didn't do it alone. Your son played a part. So did Marcus. So did a lot of people who were willing to listen instead of just react. Still," Henderson's grip tightened, "I won't forget this." The crowd began to disperse, taking the prisoners to be held for trial. The horses were reclaimed, the evidence secured. What had nearly become a war was now just a story people would tell, a cautionary tale about jumping to conclusions. But Silas knew the work wasn't done. Not yet. He found Marcus standing apart from the others, watching the proceedings with a thoughtful expression. "You held them back," Silas said. "When Henderson was ready to ride, you made him wait." Marcus shrugged. "I didn't hold anyone back. I just asked questions." "That's more than most would have done." "Maybe." Marcus turned to face him. "What happens now? The immediate crisis is over, but the underlying problem isn't. Settlers and Apaches still don't trust each other. Another incident could spark the same powder keg all over again. Then we make sure there isn't another incident. We build something that lasts." How? Silas had been thinking about that question all the way back from the canyon. The answer had come to him somewhere along the trail, forming slowly, like water carving through stone. "A council," he said. "Representatives from both sides meeting regularly, talking through problems before they become crises, setting boundaries that everyone agrees to, making decisions together instead of waiting for someone to make them for us." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You think the settlers will go for that, sitting down with Apache like equals?" "Some will. The ones who are tired of living in fear. The ones who've lost too much already." Silas met Marcus's eyes. "What about you?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "My brother died 5 years ago. I spent a long time hating everything Apache because of it. But hate's a heavy thing to carry. Gets heavier every year. So put it down." "Easy to say." "I know." Silas thought of Sarah, of the grief that had nearly destroyed him. "I know it's hard, but holding on to it doesn't bring them back. It just keeps us from living." Marcus looked away, something shifting in his expression. When he looked back, some of the hardness had faded. "I'll come to your council," he said. "Can't promise I'll like it, but I'll come. That's all I'm asking." The sun was setting by the time Silas made it back to the Apache camp. He was exhausted, every bone in his body aching from days without proper rest. But there was one more thing he needed to do. Nana was waiting for him at the edge of the encampment. The old warrior's face was as unreadable as ever, but there was something different in his posture, a loosening of tension perhaps. A weight lifted. "He knows," Goyakla said, appearing at his grandfather's side. "The scouts told him everything. The bandits, the capture, the proof. Then he knows the settlers aren't coming." "Yes," the boy smiled. "He knows." Nana stepped forward and spoke at length, his voice carrying an emotion Silas had never heard from him before. "He says, you have done what he did not believe possible," Goyakla translated. You stood between two peoples who wanted to destroy each other, and you made them see. Not with weapons, not with threats, with truth. I had help. Broken feather your grandfather's wisdom, your words. He says these things are true, but the courage was yours. Goyakla paused listening as his grandfather continued. He says you have earned something rare. You have earned his trust. Nana reached into his pouch and pulled out an object, a small carved figure made of bone and leather, intricate and beautiful. He pressed it into Silas's hands and closed his fingers around it. This belonged to my father, Goyakla explained, and his father before him. It is given only to those who have proven themselves worthy of being called family. Silas stared at the carving. His throat tightened. I don't know what to say. Say you will continue. Say you will not stop because today was hard. Say you will build the bridge you promised. Silas looked at Nana, at the old warrior who had every reason to hate his people, but had chosen to trust instead. At Goyakla, the boy whose life had started all of this. At the camp full of families who just wanted to survive. I'll continue, he said. I promise. Nana nodded once. Then he did something Silas had never seen him do before. He smiled. It was brief, just a flash across those weathered features, but it transformed his entire face. Made him look younger, somehow more human. He says you should rest, Goyakla said. Tomorrow there will be much work to do. The council you spoke of, he wants to discuss it, to make plans. Tomorrow, Silas agreed. Tonight I sleep. He walked to his cabin, the carved figure clutched in his hand. For the first time in years, he felt something other than emptiness when he looked at the place where he lived. It felt like home. The night passed peacefully. No riders appeared on the horizon. No shots rang out. Just the quiet sounds of the desert settling into darkness and the distant murmur of voices from the Apache camp. Silas lay on his bed, too tired to sleep, thinking about everything that had happened. The choices he'd made, the prices he'd paid, the lives that hung in the balance. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he had made at her bedside to keep living even when it seemed impossible. He'd kept that promise. Not just by surviving, but by finding something worth surviving for. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The council would be difficult to organize. Some settlers would resist. Some Apache would doubt. There would be setbacks and failures, and moments when the whole thing seemed ready to collapse. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, a man who'd been ready to die had found a reason to live. And two peoples who'd been ready to destroy each other had taken the first fragile steps toward peace. Silas closed his eyes and let sleep take him. In his dreams, Sarah was smiling. 6 months changed everything. Silas stood on the porch of his cabin, watching the sun rise over land that no longer felt like a battlefield. The structure behind him had been rebuilt twice now, first by Apache hands, then by settlers who'd come to help after the council was formed. The walls were solid, the roof didn't leak, and smoke rose from the chimney most mornings. But the real change wasn't in the building. It was in what surrounded it. A trading post had sprung up about a quarter-mile east, run by a Mexican woman named Elena, who spoke 3 languages and feared no one. Apache hunters brought furs and game there. Settlers brought tools and cloth. Money changed hands sometimes, but more often it was barter goods for goods, skill for skill. The council met every 2 weeks in a clearing halfway between the Apache camp and the Henderson spread. Nana came, though he rarely spoke. Marcus Holloway came, though he still looked uncomfortable. Henderson came, and sometimes even smiled. They argued. They disagreed. They walked away angry more times than Silas could count. But they kept coming back. That was the miracle, really. Not that they agreed on everything, but that they kept showing up, kept talking, kept trying. Silas heard hoofbeats approaching and turned to see a familiar figure riding toward him. Goyakla sat tall in the saddle now, his injured leg fully healed, his bearing that of a young warrior rather than a frightened boy. "Good morning, Uncle," Goyakla called out, using the Apache term for respected elder that he'd taught Silas months ago. "Morning yourself. You're up early." "Grandfather sent me." Goyakla dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd been riding since before he could walk. "There is news from the eastern camp. A group of settlers crossed the boundary line yesterday. They were hunting deer." Silas felt his stomach tighten. "Anyone hurt?" "No. Our scouts found them before they went too deep. Escorted them back to the line." Goyakla paused. "But some of the young warriors are angry. They say the settlers show no respect for the agreements." "And what does your grandfather say?" "He says this is why we have the council, to talk about such things before they become bloodshed." Silas nodded. 6 months ago, those hunting settlers would have been killed on sight. 6 months ago, the Apache warriors' anger would have been answered with arrows instead of words. Progress. Slow, imperfect, but real. "Tell your grandfather I'll speak with Henderson today. We'll bring it to the council at the next meeting." Goyakla smiled. "He said you would say this. He also said to tell you that you are becoming predictable." "Is that an insult?" "From my grandfather. It is the highest compliment. It means he trusts you to do what you say you will do." The boy stayed for breakfast, sharing dried meat and coffee, while they talked about the changes of the past months. Goyakla's English had become nearly fluent, his quick mind absorbing words and idioms like a sponge. In return, he'd been teaching Silas Apache, slowly, patiently laughing at Silas's terrible pronunciation. "Tommy Henderson asks about you," Silas mentioned. "He wants to know if you'd be willing to hunt with him sometime." Goyakla's expression flickered. "The boy who shot Loya? The same. He's different now. The time he spent with your people changed him." "I know. Loya speaks of him often." Goyakla was quiet for a moment. "It is strange, is it not, that someone who came with violence in his heart could become something else? People can change, given the chance. Do you believe that truly?" Silas thought about all the people he'd watched transform over the past months. Henderson, who'd been ready to lead a massacre and now sat peacefully at council meetings. Marcus Holloway, who'd lost his brother to violence and was learning to let go of his hatred. Tommy, who'd shot an innocent man and had worked to earn forgiveness. "I believe it," he said. "I've seen it." Goyakla nodded slowly. "Then tell Tommy Henderson I will hunt with him. But he must follow Apache ways while we are in the wilderness. Our land, our rules." "Fair enough." After Goyakla left, Silas saddled his horse and rode toward the Henderson spread. The boundary markers were visible now, wooden posts driven into the ground at regular intervals, marking the line that both sides had agreed not to cross without permission. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was better than the chaos that had existed before. Jacob Henderson was working in his barn when Silas arrived. The big man looked up from the harness he was repairing and nodded in greeting. "Brennan, what brings you out this way?" "Boundary issue. Some of your people crossed the line yesterday, hunting deer." Henderson's face tightened. "That would be the Collins boys. I told them to stay clear of Apache territory." "They didn't listen." "They're young. Think they know better than everyone else." Henderson set down his tools and wiped his hands on his trousers. "Anyone hurt?" "No. The Apache scouts escorted them back without incident. But Nana's warriors are angry. They see it as disrespect. And they're right." Henderson's voice was heavy with frustration. "I'll talk to Collins. Make sure he understands his boys need to follow the rules. We should bring it to the council anyway. Make it official. Set consequences for future violations." "Consequences on both sides." "Both sides," Silas confirmed. "That's the only way this works. Same rules for everyone." Henderson was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "I'll support that. Even if it means my own people face punishment. That's all I'm asking." They talked for a while longer, discussing the practical details of enforcement and boundaries. It was the kind of conversation that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Two men from different worlds finding common ground. As Silas was preparing to leave, Henderson spoke again. "My son's different now." Silas paused. "I've noticed. He talks about his time with the Apache like it was, I don't know, like it changed something inside him." Henderson's voice was rough with emotion. "I spent his whole life teaching him to hate those people, and in 2 weeks they taught him something I never could." "What's that?" "That they're people, just people." Henderson shook his head. "I wasted so many years being afraid of something I didn't understand. You're understanding now, that's what matters." "Is it enough? After everything I almost did?" Silas thought about the question. About the mob Henderson had gathered, the blood that had nearly been spilled, the lives that had hung in the balance. "It's a start," he said finally. "The rest is up to you." The council meeting that week was one of the longest they'd had. The boundary violation sparked heated debate, with young warriors demanding harsher punishments and some settlers arguing that the rules were too restrictive. Silas sat in the middle, listening more than speaking. That was his role now, not to make decisions for either side, but to help them make decisions together. Nana spoke through Goyakla, his words measured and calm. "The agreement exists because both peoples need it. When one side breaks the agreement, it weakens trust for everyone. This cannot be allowed." Marcus Holloway responded. "We're not disagreeing with that. But the punishment needs to fit the offense. Those boys didn't hurt anyone. They just crossed a line. A line that represents the difference between peace and war." Nana countered. "If lines mean nothing, then neither do words. And if words mean nothing, we have nothing." The debate went on for hours. Silas watched faces read body language, waited for the moment when intervention might help. It came when Henderson stood up. "My people crossed the line," he said. "That's a fact, and I'm responsible for them." He turned to face Nana directly. "What would satisfy your warriors? What would restore the trust that was broken?" Nana was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. "The Collins boys will work for our people for 1 week. They will carry water, gather wood, tend fires. They will learn what it means to respect others' land by respecting others' labor." Henderson's jaw tightened. Silas could see him fighting against old instincts, old prejudices. Then he nodded. "Agreed." A murmur went through the assembled crowd. Apache and settler alike seemed surprised by the quick resolution. "This is how it should be," Silas said, rising to his feet. "Not perfect, not easy, but fair. Both sides giving something. Both sides getting something. That's the only way this works." The meeting ended with handshakes and nods of respect. It wasn't harmony, there was still too much history for that, but it was something. A foundation. A beginning. Walking back to his cabin that evening, Silas found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him here. The empty canteen. The dying boy. The choice that had made no sense at the time, but had changed everything. He'd been ready to die that day in the desert. Had almost welcomed it. The grief of losing Sarah and his wife had hollowed him out, left him with nothing but a shell going through the motions of living. But then, Goyakla had made that sound, that weak, broken whimper, and something inside Silas had awakened. Some part of him that still believed life was worth saving, even when it wasn't his own. That belief had grown over the past months, fed by every small victory, every bridge built, every hand extended across the divide. It wasn't the same as the life he'd lost. Nothing could replace Sarah. Nothing could fill the hole her absence had left. But it was something new, something that belonged to him. Goyakla was waiting at the cabin when Silas arrived. The boy had a serious expression on his face. "My grandfather wishes to speak with you, tonight in his tent." "Is something wrong?" "No, something different." Goyakla hesitated. He would not tell me what, only that it was important. Silas followed the boy to the Apache camp where Nana's tent stood at the center. Guards nodded as they passed, their faces friendly now where they'd once been hostile. Inside, Nana sat cross-legged on a woven blanket. He looked older somehow, the weight of leadership visible in every line of his weathered face. But his eyes were bright, alert, filled with intelligence that transcended any language barrier. He gestured for Silas to sit, then spoke at length while Goyakla translated. He says the council is working better than he expected. 6 months without bloodshed. 6 months of talking instead of fighting. He did not believe this was possible. Neither did I, Silas admitted. He says you have given his people something valuable. Hope. The young warriors still remember the old ways, still carry anger for what has been done to them. But now they also see another path, a path that does not end in death. Silas felt the weight of those words. Your grandfather has given the same gift to my people. The settlers who were ready to kill are learning to see your people as neighbors instead of enemies. Nana nodded as Goyakla translated, then spoke again. He says there is something he must tell you, something he has not spoken of before. Silas waited. When his son, my father, was killed by soldiers, my grandfather wanted to burn everything. He wanted to gather every warrior and ride against the white settlements until none were left standing or none of his people remained alive. He was ready for war, ready for death. Goyakla's voice was thick with emotion. But then, I was born, his son's son, the last piece of his family left in this world. And he realized that revenge would not bring his son back. It would only take away the future. Nana spoke again, his dark eyes fixed on Silas. He says you understand this. You lost your daughter. You wanted to die. But instead you chose to save a stranger's child. You chose life over death, hope over despair. Silas's throat tightened. I didn't choose anything. I just acted. That is what choosing is. Not thinking. Acting. When the moment comes, we show who we truly are. Nana leaned forward. You showed yourself to be a man who saves, not destroys. Saves. The old warrior reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out an object. Silas recognized, the carved bone figure he'd been given months ago. But there was something new beside it. A second carving, larger and more intricate. This was made by our best craftsman, Goyakla explained. It represents the bridge between two peoples. My grandfather commissioned it after the council was formed. He has been waiting for the right moment to present it. Nana placed the carving in Silas's hands. It was beautiful, two figures standing on opposite sides of a carved bridge reaching toward each other across the gap. He says, this is you. This is what you have built. Not with wood or stone, but with courage and trust. Goyakla's voice broke slightly. He says his people will remember you. Long after we are all gone, they will tell stories of the white man who chose mercy over fear, who showed that enemies could become brothers. Silas stared at the carving, unable to speak. His vision blurred with tears. He hadn't known he was capable of crying anymore. I don't deserve this, he finally managed. Nana spoke, and Goyakla laughed softly. He says that is exactly why you deserve it. The ones who seek glory never build anything lasting. Only those who act without expecting reward create things that endure. Silas looked up at the old warrior. Across the gulf of language and culture, something passed between them. Understanding, respect, the kind of bond that went deeper than words. Thank you, Silas said, for trusting me, for giving me a chance to prove that not all my people are enemies. Nana nodded once solemnly. Then his face cracked into that rare smile, the one Silas had only seen a handful of times. He spoke a single word. Brother. The word needed no translation. The seasons turned. Spring became summer. Summer faded into fall. The council continued to meet, continued to argue, continued to find ways forward. There were setbacks, a stolen horse here, a misunderstanding there, but nothing that couldn't be talked through. The Collins boys completed their week of labor with the Apache, and came back, changed just as Tommy Henderson had. They talked about what they'd learned, spread the word to other young men their age. Slowly, the fear that had defined the frontier for so long began to loosen its grip. Elena's trading post became a gathering place for both peoples. Apache women taught settler wives how to tan hides. Settler blacksmiths repaired Apache tools. Children played together in the dust, speaking a jumbled mix of English and Apache that only they could understand. It wasn't paradise. Prejudice didn't disappear overnight. Old wounds still ached. But the bleeding had stopped and healing had begun. Silas marked the anniversary of that day in the desert with a quiet walk to the place where he'd found Goyakla. The spot looked no different from any other stretch of sand and rock, but to him it was sacred ground, the place where everything had changed. He knelt and touched the earth, remembering. "I didn't know what I was doing that day," he said to no one, or maybe to Sarah, or maybe to some force larger than himself. "I just knew I couldn't watch another child die, couldn't stand there and do nothing while someone's life slipped away." The wind stirred the sand at his feet. "I thought I was saving him. Turns out he saved me." He stayed there until the sun began to set, then walked back to his cabin. Goyakla was waiting for him, as had become their custom on significant days. "1 year," the young man said. He was nearly 13 now, growing taller every month, his voice beginning to deepen. "1 year since you found me. Feels longer. And shorter at the same time." Goyakla smiled. "My grandfather says time does that. Stretches and compresses depending on how we fill it." "Your grandfather's a wise man. He says the same about you." They sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. The sounds of the Apache camp drifted toward them, drums singing the laughter of children. The sounds of life continuing generation after generation. "What happens now?" Goyakla asked. "The council is working. The peace is holding. What do we do with tomorrow, and the tomorrow after that?" Silas considered the question. A year ago, he hadn't been able to think past his next meal. Now he had the luxury of contemplating the future. "We keep building," he said finally. "We make the bridge stronger. We teach the young ones what we've learned so they can carry it forward when we're gone. We don't let fear win." "That sounds like a lot of work." "It is, but it's work worth doing." Goyakla nodded slowly. Then he reached out and gripped Silas's arm, the same gesture Nana had made that first day when everything hung in the balance. "Thank you," he said, "for not walking past me that day, for giving me your water when you had none for yourself." "You don't have to thank me." "I know. That is why I want to." The young man's eyes glistened in the starlight. "You gave me my life. I will spend the rest of it trying to be worthy of that gift." Silas felt his own eyes burning. He pulled Goyakla into an embrace, awkward at first, then fierce and tight. "You already are," he said. "You already are." They stayed on the porch until late, talking about everything and nothing. When Goyakla finally rode back to camp, Silas remained watching the moon rise over the desert. He thought about the man he'd been a year ago, broken hollow, waiting to die. He thought about the choice he'd made without really making it, the instinct that had driven him to his knees beside a dying boy. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made to keep living, about how close he'd come to breaking it, and how a stranger's child had given him a reason to keep it. The carved bone figure hung around his neck, warm against his chest. The bridge carving sat on his mantle inside, a daily reminder of what had been built and what remained to be built. Silas Brennan had come to this territory to die. Instead, he'd found a reason to live. Not in forgetting his grief, but in transforming it. In taking the love he'd had for his daughter and using it to save another man's grandson. In turning his pain into a bridge that connected two worlds. He touched the carving at his neck and smiled. Some men spent their whole lives searching for purpose. Silas had found his in a half-empty canteen and a choice that made no sense. He'd given everything he had to a dying stranger. And in return, he'd received more than he ever thought possible. A home. A family. A future worth fighting for. The desert wind whispered around him, carrying the distant sounds of two peoples learning to live side by side. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was real, and it was growing, and it was his. Silas Brennan was no longer a broke cowboy waiting to die. He was the bridge between two worlds. And 300 Apache warriors along with 100 settler families would make sure that bridge stood for generations to come. That was his legacy. That was his redemption. That was enough.